is no children's story, but I can share a little bit of story. In March, I'm taking a group of teachers and other individuals to Lupani, Zimbabwe, Africa. And 2 years ago, Sunnydale Academy, a group of 20 students and a group of 20 adults went to Zimbabwe, and we built an elementary school there in Zimbabwe. And Lupani is halfway between Victoria Falls and Bulawayo, there in the country of Zimbabwe. And so we went there, we built a place, and they thought it would be months. And we finished it in days. In fact, we finished it in just a few days because it's one-room schools. No electricity, no plumbing, or anything like that. No regulations, basically. And so we finished it actually a day early. And now we're going back this year to build the secondary school, right next door to the elementary school. We talked about in the mission story, the number of students. That school that we built 2 years ago has 258 students, preschool to 5th grade. And in January they'll add 6th grade, and so they should probably approach nearly 300 students just in their elementary. And now they need a high school, and they also need a preschool. So every time when the people there heard it was a 20 American high school student, they thought this project will never get finished. And kids finished it in record time, and now we have this school that's doing really well. It's going to be amazing to see the people that will be in heaven because of that school. And the workers that going to come from that and be a great blessing. So we're looking forward to going back. It's not a place that Maranatha would ever build. I don't know how much you know about Maranatha. Maranatha usually builds in a place that they can have a pretty nice hotel, 3 to 4 or 5-star hotel. There is no hotel here. We're actually going to be sleeping in the classroom we build on, hopefully, mattresses. We're trying to get sent there, but it would never be a place that Maranatha would go. So if we had not God, they would not have a school. And so we're proud of that. Maranatha did build a nice, huge school in Victoria Falls and a nice school in Bulawayo, but not little towns like Lupani. So people there are much appreciated. Anyway, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Joe Allison. I have the privilege of being the superintendent of education, is what Michelle Hansen wants me to say. Had that position for a couple of years. In 1998 to 2002, I was the principal at Sunnydale. Despite the fact that I grew up in Missouri, I never went to Sunnydale. We could never afford it. But and then I spent nearly 9 years at Union College as the chair of the education department there. And the reason I came back to Missouri is our grandchildren live near Columbia, and I wanted to get closer to them. And the conference committee has allowed me to live near Sunnydale, where we had a home already. So that's why I'm back in Missouri. So I left college. People were saying you're kind of nuts, and I said, no, actually, I'm being promoted to more full-time grandfather, which is more important to me than a position. You might wonder, and those of you that know the little initials behind my name, DDE, I'm a doctor of education. That's what that means. And so my daughter tries to keep me humble, saying that I'm the type of doctor that can't help you at all. So, but she'd always come to me for problems and things like that. Anyway, so I grew up in church. I'm actually third-generation Adventist. My grandmother, at the age of 19, was a charter member of the church in Jefferson City, Missouri, Viola Powers. And I don't meet too many people from our generation that's in Viola, but I know she is. Anyway, so I grew up in the church. And every Sabbath morning, my dad didn't go to church, but my mom made sure that me and my 5 siblings got to church every Sabbath, I mean. And we had a 1961 Impala Biscayne station wagon. I don't know if anybody recognizes that. Maybe you own one yourself. But every day, every Sabbath, we go there. Well, the problem that we had is there were 7 of us to get ready for church. 6 kids and mom. We had 1 bathroom. And so it was kind of interesting Sabbath morning, and we weren't sometimes in the best of moods and treating each other the best. And there became further issues because as we went out to the car, there's 6 kids and only 3 doors. So then there's the fight over the doors. And so we were just we were a mess on our way to church. And so there was something, though, about that church parking lot that I must have angel dust or something, because once we parked the car and walked out of the car, we were just angels. We were just kind of walking and happy and really complimentary of each other and just had a wonderful time. Just a wonderful family. And people were to say, oh, that Allison family is so wonderful. So treat each other so sweetly. And there we are in church, and then church is over, and then we started walking out to the parking lot. And again, there's only 3 doors, and we started kind of fighting over them. And so Didn't last very long. Got in the car one Sabbath, took off toward home, got about 5-6 miles away from church, and my mom said, "Where is your little sister Kay?" And it didn't take us very long in our station wagon to look around and see that Kay was not with us. We had left her at church. And so my mom did a cool thing, and it was a very low place there on the interstate, and she made a U-turn in the middle of the interstate, and we went speeding back to church. And she threatened us all the way back that if anybody ever said anything to Kay, we'd be grounded for the rest of our lives. And so we pulled into the parking lot, and there was Kay at the sandbox with her little friend Cherie. And so my mom, being the oldest, my mom told me, "You go get Kay and don't let her know anything about what happened." And so I got out of the car and I walked over to the sandbox, and in my calmest voice possible, I said, "Kay, come on, it's time to go." And she said, "Okay." So she popped up and she turned around and waved to Cherie, "Bye, Cherie, see you next Sabbath." And she got my hand and went back to the car. And you can believe that Kay got a door that day. We didn't even argue with her. So she got in the car and went back home. My sister never heard that story for 17 years. She never heard that we left her at church that day. But to her, she wasn't lost. She was having a great time there with Cherie, but we found her. So she was found without knowing that she was even lost. And so what I want to share with you this morning is an experience from the life of Christ, but also apply it to our own lives about a time that happened to him. Let's have a prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity to meet together as a church. And Lord, it matters not the number, it's the Spirit. And I pray that you would be here with us, that our hearts and minds would be in such a condition that we would hear your words, hear your Spirit, and that you and your angels will be here worshiping with us this morning. It's my prayer in Christ's name. Amen. If you'll turn to the book of Luke. The book of Luke, and you probably know this, and maybe you don't know this, the book of Luke contains the entire first 30 years of Christ's life. Did you realize that? The first 30 years of Christ's life is recorded in the book of Luke. We're not going to go verse by verse. I'm going to hit and highlight some things there. But if you start in chapter 2 of the book of Luke, and I'm sorry, I should say chapter 2 of the book of Luke, illustrates the entire first 30 years of Christ's life. And the story there is the fact that, start with verse 1, that in that day Caesar had a tax, or called that people should be taxed in their hometown. And so it talks about the fact that Mary and Joseph had to go to Bethlehem, even though Mary was quite pregnant. And in verse 6 it tells us, "And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered." And so Mary had her baby. And then there was all kinds of events, and there was in the same country shepherds abiding in the field, this is verse 8, keeping watch over their flock by night. So they were told about the event, and they came, and perhaps others were told as well. And it was a marvelous night, the birth of Christ. And we just had that celebration or commemoration of that event just this past Christmas. And the people came, and it says that Mary, as she heard the shepherds talk, and all these things were going on, in verse 19 it says that Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart. It goes on to say that there is a certain time period in which Jesus was to be circumcised and given a name, and the angel had told already Joseph what his name should be, and then they had to go to Jerusalem to dedicate Jesus. And as they were there, in verse 25, there was a man in Jerusalem by the name of Simeon. And Simeon was there, and he had been told by God that he would not perish and not die until he had been able to see the Messiah. And as soon as Joseph and Mary walked into the temple at court there, he recognized the child through the Spirit. And he went over and he took the child. It tells us in verse 28, he actually took the child out of the arms of Joseph and Mary. And I'm sure those of us that have been parents, and if we had a newborn 8-day-old baby and some stranger came up and took them out of his arms, we might not be very happy about that. And perhaps Joseph was ready to punch him out or something like that. But as soon as he took Jesus, the Lord, he talks about the fact the Lord has been gracious to him. And he pronounced a blessing upon Jesus and upon Mary and upon Joseph. But he said something specifically to Mary in verse 35 of this chapter. It says, "Yea, and a sword shall pierce through thy own soul also, and that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed." And then it talks about the aspect of the fact that And the prophetess was there also and blessed the Lord. And again, Mary marveled at these things and kept them in her heart. Well, the days were fulfilled. Now, the interesting thing about Luke is Luke does not say anything about Egypt. Luke says all the things were performed and they went home. Matthew chapter 2, Matthew is the only person that records the flight to Egypt. I don't know why. I don't think it's an inconsistency, but Matthew is the only one that talks about the fact that Joseph and Mary went to Egypt to protect baby Jesus from who? Herod. Herod was wanting to kill all the babies to secure his throne. And so it says an angel came to Joseph and said, you've got to take Jesus to Egypt, stay there until Herod dies and come back. And so, but Matthew is the only book that records that. Luke does not record that. And so we don't hear anything. As they went back home, and in verse 40 it says, the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. So they returned to Nazareth, the home of Mary and Joseph, and where they had begun, and now it became the home of Jesus. And so for the next 12 years, we hear absolutely nothing about Jesus. There's a gap there. Until we get to verse 41. And it says, now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And it says, and when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. Do you know how long the custom of the feast was? How many days was required for a family to attend the feast? Fill the days? 7 days. 7 days. But because they were an agrarian society and some people were very poor, there were also rules that said you would only have to spend 3 days there so you get back to your farm and things like that. And so I don't know, I would think that they spent all 7 days there. And I see the Passover as a time similar to our camp meeting. Camp meeting is a time where everybody comes together and you have these great things going on, but you have the kids programs and you have the parents programs. And when they get to camp meeting, I don't know about you, but when we take our grandchildren to camp meeting, we don't see them only to get their lunch tickets, and sometimes they don't even sit with us to eat. They go off with their friends. And so that's what I view this feast like. That's what's happening. But before they got there for that fantastic celebration, they had to travel from Nazareth down to Bethlehem. Now, there were two ways to travel. The way that most people travel would be to go here and cut over to Jericho and cut down into Jerusalem. They did that because there was water, but there was also more safety there. The shorter route was right here, 74 miles. It was through very rugged land and through a part of the region that had thieves and robbers, and so it wasn't safe. And so what they would do in those days, they would group up together, friends, family, neighbors. They would travel as a caravan. And what do you suppose, how far could a caravan go in a day, according to historians? And they were on speedy donkeys, using their feet, things like that. What's that?
How far in a day?
How far in a day? Yeah. How far could they travel in a day?
10 to 15 miles.
Well, that's pretty close. 20 miles is what they figure an average if they were walking during that time, in that time period of history. So 20 miles a day, taking about 5 days to go the long route. But all along that way, what the families were to do is to tell their children why they were going to Jerusalem. What was the history behind it? What event had taken place that would even cause them to celebrate the Passover? So all that time, there was education going on and fellowship and some things. And as they went along, they would pick up more people, and perhaps people they hadn't seen for a whole year. So not only before they got to Jerusalem, they already were celebrating and worshiping. So they get to Jerusalem, spend the time, maybe 7 days. And again, as I said, it's kind of like camp meeting. The adults have their meetings, the children have their meetings. Joseph and Mary were so happy that Jesus was going with them, because Jesus, even though he was not disrespectful, he challenged the rabbi in their town, or the teacher in their town. Now, you all know that Jesus was a homeschooler, right? Jesus was a homeschooler. But in every little town like Nazareth, there was usually a retired priest or rabbi or someone of learning that would teach the boys. And I'm sorry, the girls weren't included, but that's the way it was. But would teach the boys. But Jesus seemed, according to Mrs. White and the Czar of Ages, would seem to challenge them on some areas. And Mary and Joseph felt that if they went to Jerusalem and got with the scholars, that this would help him be a little more respectful to their religion and some of the rules that they had. And so there they were. They were in Jerusalem. And right away, Jesus went and began to learn at the feet of these scholars. Joseph and Mary were involved in their classes. In fact, Mrs. White tells us that Jesus caused a problem, not that he was being disrespectful or being rude, but the teachers were fighting over who would be his teacher. This was such a bright young man. He was so gifted. We want him to be our teacher. And so there was actually some bickering going on between the teachers. Who would be Jesus' teacher? Who would lead him out of this whole thing? Well, the thing about it is, and I would be remiss if I didn't say a little bit about education and Adventist education. Dr. Knight, George Knight, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Dr. Knight. I had had some classes from him in college. He's written quite a bit on church history, but he came out in 2006 with some reasons why we need to support and we need Adventist education. Number one is introduce students to the Bible as a framework for thinking and valuing. Can you still see me there? Okay. Number two, introduces young people to Jesus as Lord and Savior. Number three, Adventist schools at its best leads a person to a lifelong dedication of service to others. And we've seen that, and maybe some of you would experience that, and that's going on right now at Sunnydale Academy. We have some students right now that when they graduate from Sunnydale, they have committed. There's a program right now that's trying to be developed by the General Conference in China and some of those places that we are having a hard time getting into, where college students or couples go to China and go and take Mandarin in the university. China right now, anybody who wants to study in China, you got a visa in a minute. And so they'll go and study there. And then what the hope is that they would begin a Bible class in their home and begin to tell others about Jesus under the auspices of being a student. But they also will learn Mandarin, which is the largest spoken language in the world. So that's just one thing that's going on. But we have dedicated young people, some of you. Adventist School helps students to view every topic from a philosophic perspective of Scripture. They have a worldview that has values. Do you think there are values in our worldview in the United States today? No, there's not. You can just see it just the way our government is responding, the way our president, our congressmen, our representatives, the way they're responding about things. They have no values. You just heard about the situation in New Jersey with the slowdown of the traffic. You've heard that it's all over the news. In actuality, I don't know if you've seen that, but one person died because an ambulance was not able to get to them quick enough in that whole entanglement a couple months ago. And so, just because of some silliness, but there's no value there. There's no worldview that says, like was read to us this morning in the appeal, offering appeal. Consider others before yourself. What's happening in the United States right now, everyone seems to be considering themselves before others. It's unfortunate. One of the major contributions to Adventist schools is to bring young people together in significant numbers so that they can make lifelong friends and meet spouses who share their vision of what is important in life. And that's very important thing. I've had the privilege to be a principal at a day school and a boarding school. And I can tell you the relationships that are developed at boarding school are far more long-lasting than those that have at day school. Not that they don't have them. My daughter graduated, she has friends. Facebook has helped with that a lot. But there's something about boarding academy friendships that just seem to last forever. The last one is that the influence of godly teachers and other adult role models is very important. Lessons are best learned when students hear the same thing when they're at school, when they're at home, when they're at church. And they call this those of you, and all of you look like you're old enough, except for some of us, that you may have experienced or know about milking. And not modernized milking, but hand milking. And there's a stool that you use. How many legs does a stool have? It's three legs. If any of those legs are missing, it was a problem. And that's what they call this a three-legged stool, to have the foundation for our young people that are hearing the same message at school, at home, and at church. I just want to share with you an application that King Frederick II, in the 13th century, he's a very brilliant man. He took on the Catholic Church, and he was a good statistician or a good general, and all these kinds of things. But he also liked to do a little bit of experimenting and tinkering. And so he thought, what would it be if we were to take babies and not say anything to them, not have a word spoken to them or sung to them, what language would they develop? And King Frederick thought that if we did that, we would get the language of heaven. And he thought that would be Hebrew. He thought Hebrew was the language of heaven. And so he said that's what he did. So he got 50 babies. They had plenty of food, clothing, well cared for. They had nurses there to take care of all of them. But they could not sing to them and they could not talk to them. They could touch them, they could bathe them, they could feed them, all these things. And so by the end of the experiment, it was a total failure. Total failure. Because every baby died. Every baby died. And the reason I read a little bit more about it, they stopped eating, they stopped drinking, and they finally just died of malnutrition, even though they had all this stuff. The point there is that if we're not talking to our young people and sharing with our young people or others about Christ and this world, they will die spiritually. Well, it says there in Luke chapter 44, or 43, 2 verse 43, excuse me. And when they fulfilled the days, they returned, and the days fulfilled probably were how many? I'll test you a bit. 7 days. When they had fulfilled the days, and as they returned, the child tarried behind in Jerusalem. Joseph and Mary knew not of it. And probably what happened is that Joseph and Mary told Jesus, we are going to leave at noon on this day and just be with the rest of the group. And so they took off. There was a huge group with them, thinking that Jesus was there, but they supposed him to have been in the company. Went a day's journey, and that'd be how many miles? 20 miles. Went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinfolk and acquaintances. Well, why did they seek him among the kinfolks and acquaintances? We were told that Jesus was always there to help his mother and father, and he was missing. It was time to prepare supper or get the fire and pitch the tent or whatever they had to sleep on, and Jesus was nowhere to be found, which is very, very odd. And normally here, I would tell young people, wouldn't that be great if mom and dad knew something was wrong because you didn't show up to help them? Or wasn't there to do this chore or that chore. But they couldn't find him anywhere. So they checked among the kinfolk. It says they did not find him. And they turned back to Jerusalem, which was how far back? 20 miles. They turned back to Jerusalem to see if they could find Jesus. And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple. Now, I don't think it took them 3 days in small Jerusalem to kind of search for him. It wasn't New York or Chicago. I think the 3 days included the day's journey out, day's journey in, and then probably another day trying to figure out where he might be. But they found him. They were desperate. They didn't know where Jesus was. And I would say probably immediately, Mary thought back to that verse 35 that we read, what Simeon had said. Yea, a sword shall pierce through thy own soul, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. Her heart was pierced. She and Joseph had lost the Son of God. They had lost the Son of God. And they were frantic. They finally found him. He was with the teachers and scholars and really having a good time. And people were marveled at his knowledge and experience and the questions he's asked. And again, he was not disrespectful ever, but he was challenging. It says in the Desire of Ages that those teachers' hearts burned within them with the things that Jesus had said at 12 years old. 12 years old. And so there's the discussion between him and his mom, and why did you do this to us, and I should be about my Father's work. But it says there in 51, verse 51 of our chapter, Luke 2, and he went down with them. He didn't argue with them. He didn't say, hey, I'm staying here. You guys, it says he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them. So his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. It says in 52, it's 51 and 52, and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God. Amen. That's it. We don't hear again from Jesus for how many years? About 18. But here in chapter 2 of Luke is Jesus' first 30 years. Little snippets here and there. It tells us that he was preparing to become the Messiah. Went home, worked with his dad, worked with his mom, continued to learn, and to grow. The question I have for you is, in your life's journey, have you left Jesus behind? Have you left him in a figurative Jerusalem? You know, it's pretty easy to go this way, distractions, all kinds of other things going on. Of course, we talked about the path being narrow to Jesus, but that's the way we should be going. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, Jesus tells us, "Come unto me, all you that labor, heavy laden, and I will give you rest." How many of us are having burdens and issues? Being a Christian doesn't mean everything is going to be perfect. In fact, the preachers that are saying that there's wealth and health, if you're a Christian, that's impossible. I just heard this past week a saying that I thought was pretty good. A Baptist preacher said that if you wake up in the morning, if you don't smack right into the devil, there's a problem. Because it means you and he are walking down the same path. You and he are walking down the same path. You're going to have problems. Jesus knows that. Jesus told us that. If you're a Christian, you're going to have issues. But Jesus says, "Come unto me, all you that labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." If you've left Jesus in a figurative Jerusalem, you need to come back to him. And he says, he's here with his arms this morning, saying to us, and every day. In Matthew 7:7 and 8, it tells us that seek and we shall find. And it tells us in verse 8, and he that seeketh findeth. So he's there. This morning, we need to evaluate, have we left Jesus in spiritual Jerusalem, or literal Jerusalem? But if we haven't, that's wonderful. If we walk with him every day, but we have a responsibility to help those that may have misplaced Jesus or left him behind. And those of you that may have left Christ somewhere, you need to reevaluate your lives. And he's saying, "Come unto me, all you that labor heavy laden. Seek, and you will find me again."